You use the chat. I'll be over there, hit the blue button. It just lets us know that you know.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. We're going to talk about defining and measuring target behaviors today. We're going to spend a little time. So what is the purpose? More, Rob, it's already not working.
Ask her that was just fiddling with it.
Click. Click. Perfect. Okay. So the purpose, we're going to kind of broken into, we're going to talk about definitions for a while. And then the second half, hopefully, if I do this timing right, we'll talk about measurement systems and how to choose which measurement style, how to choose. And so, what was I gonna say? And then we'll look at some common mistakes. So we'll really look at specifically defining and measuring in terms of what we're writing into our treatment plans and the objectives. So for BCs, I guess most of us, so yeah, we have like a pretty even mix. So for BCs, BAs, we can think of this in terms of formulating objectives, how to write objectives, define the behaviors, choose mastery criteria in your objectives. For other staff, I mean, this applies to writing treatment objectives when you're writing your progress notes, when you're taking ABC data or any other data for that matter. So it applies in lots of different areas, but I am going to be mostly talking in the context of formulating objectives in the treatment plan. So some common mistakes that we'll point out, just this is sort of like how I framed the training. So some common mistakes that come up when we're looking at behaviors in treatment plans or on data sheets is we have ambiguous definitions of the behavior. So the behavior is just not defined well enough so that each and every staff has a clear understanding of what to count. So some examples: becoming upset, participates, displays aggression, refuses. All of these can be interpreted differently by different staff, right? So we would want to break those down more, define those more specifically. And we'll talk about how to do that, options for how to do that. Multiple behaviors in one objective. This is really easy to do because lots of things like behaviors happen in clusters, like the most common one, tantrum behaviors, which is fine to use as long as we're defining it, but there are some behaviors that we want to target that actually include multiple little discrete behaviors, right? So if you have tantrum behaviors in an objective, somewhere in that treatment plan, we want to have that defined. Includes, does not include, right? And what the discrete behaviors are. So a big theme with the definitions is being able to identify what individual behaviors are and decide if you want to target individual behavior or if you want to cluster them together in the way that we do kind of with tantrum behavior. So, but some just go together also. So we accidentally just include them, like looks at and responds to. Raises hands and answers questions, takes turns and shares. I see this a lot with like social and play objectives, right? Where we're like, we want them to be engaged and be sharing and be asking and be giving up stuff. And that's all that's all happening during play. So it's easy to kind of lump together, but they're all actually individual behaviors. So you have to be able to define those and decide how we want to target them either together or separately. Not using the ideal measurement system. So the measurement system isn't the best choice. It doesn't represent the behavior the best way that it could. Sometimes the measurement system in the treatment plan that we choose for mastery criteria doesn't then match what ends up in the data sheet. I made this mistake, and my staff turned in data sheets and I'm like, oh my gosh, they took great, and it was % of opportunities, and I just didn't translate that to the data sheet. So that happens commonly. Also, and then the measurement for mastery criteria is too complicated to take data. So we'll talk, there's all of these different dimensions and kind of check boxes. When you're writing a good objective, you have to consider all of these things. So it is like a big job, it's very complicated. You have to not only choose what measurement system best represents the behavior, but you also have to make sure that it's possible for people to take that data, and then make necessary adjustments. So, we'll start with behavior and definitions of behavior. So what is a behavior? Behavior, so Skinner's definition, behavior is what an organism is doing, or more accurately, what it is observed doing by another organism. So that observable piece is really important. As we commonly can think it's just an action that is observable by another person or organism. Or the portion of an organism's interaction with its environment that includes movement of some part of the organism. So that movement piece is really helpful also. Most of you probably have already been exposed to this concept of like emotions and thoughts as also being behaviors. So like that's a branch of behaviorism we call radical behaviorism. We do consider thoughts, emotions, unobservable things, we call those private events, to be behaviors, but we're not dealing with those things in applied behavior analysis. So we're going to stick to things that are observable, which are, we call those public events versus private events. So how do we distinguish? This is one way most of you have run into this at some point in either work or school. Often Lindsay is the person who came up with this. It's a way to distinguish whether a behavior we're thinking about targeting is a good behavior for targeting, right? So is it an action? Is it observable? That's what is helping us answer that. So the dead man test is if a dead person can do it, it's not like a charming idea. I feel like every time this comes up, we try to think of like a better way to think about it, but it is the dead man test. So if a dead person could do it, it's not a behavior that should be chosen for measurement. It shouldn't be targeted for intervention. Because it doesn't meet those things. It's not observable, not measurable. You could talk more about Ogden Lindsay. He's awesome. You should look it up. We aren't talking about Ogden today. So some examples of the dead man test. Let's look at some examples, and we can decide if it passes the test, if it could be targeted as a behavior, as a target behavior for intervention or not. So here we go. So we have behavior and does it pass or fail? So raise his hand. Does that pass the test? Is it
just keep going.
okay. So raise his hand. Does that pass the test or does that fail the test? So passes means we could target it, and fails means we should not target it. Rob, it does it. It's gonna cover something, and I need you to watch the chat more than.
Okay. You want me to put it back?
What?
You want me to put
It
it
just
back?
doesn't matter, you know?
But they won't be able to see the thing.
But we'll say it.
Okay.
Okay, so raise his hand. Does it pass or fail? Rob says pass. Yeah, that passes the test. On task during reading. Does that pass or fail? I'm getting thumbs down from Pat. Anybody else? I get a thumbs up. I got a thumbs down. Do we have any chat responses? Guys, on Zoom, respond in the chat if you want to. Actually, not if you want to. Can you please just do it? On task during reading. That is the tricky one. And I think you can probably make an argument for either, but I say that fails because reading is actually like a private event. Like you can't observe reading. That was the point there. Stays in your seat. That's a hard one. Passes.
Pass.
Fails. So the point here is stays in your seat. That is observable, but if you think of it in terms of the dead man test, that's like laying on the floor. Like it doesn't involve a movement. So it wouldn't be, so if you think of it, and this will come up again, if you think of it in terms of the opposite of that is, which one is more measurable and more observable? Staying in your seat or getting out of your seat? getting out of your seat passes the dead man test better than staying in your seat does. So in terms of measuring that, we would want to take those things into consideration if you were targeting staying in the seat. Leaving the playground, pass or fail? Pass. Yes. Observable, involves action. Listens to the teacher. Fails. Cannot observe listening. Does not involve an action. Writes in an answer. Passing, good. And drops to the floor. Pass. Good. Okay. Any questions about that? Good. All right, methods for defining behavior. So we're gonna look at like, there are lots of different approaches to defining behaviors. We're going to.
I'm gonna move it and then I'll leave it. I'll leave it where it is now.
Stretching.
Ignore me.
Thank you, Rob.
I'm like-
So there are different ways or approaches that we can use for when we look at creating definitions of behavior.
I did that. That's my fault.
Rob.
So that you.
I'm just kidding. Okay, so one way of defining behavior is topographically. Topography refers to the physical, what a behavior looks like the physical form or shape that a behavior takes, right? So if you're defining a behavior just based on its topography, you're just writing a description of the shape of the behavior. So turns knob and pulls door towards up. So physically, what does that behavior look like? And then functionally, so if we're considering the function of the behavior and we're focusing on that in the definition, it's what the function is what impact does the behavior have on the environment, and we're including that in the definition. It refers to the product of the behavior in the environment. So what's the product? That action opens the door. That's the impact of the behavior on the environment. Now, an operational definition, which we all should have heard of, combines these two. And this is the most commonly used, bingo, there's the arrow. The most commonly used type of definition is the operational definition. This is what we're trained to do. This is what you see in your treatment plans most often, and it's pretty good because it combines these two aspects. Grasps and turns knob while pulling door open. So I have a nice clear picture of what the behavior is. I have a clear picture of the impact on the environment. It's pointing me to the function. There are potential problems with operational definitions. We've all read treatment plans. We've all learned to take data and failed. We've all been on every side of this, right? So there are parts, anytime you try to write a definition, there's going to be parts that could potentially be interpreted differently by different people. We talked about that when we talked about the ambiguity in the definitions, right? So there is some research showing that operational definitions aren't as good, don't produce as high inter-observer agreement as using this other type of definition we take from precision teaching, which is called pinpointing. So that's the next type of definition we're going to talk about is pinpointing. Pinpointing is taken from precision teaching, which Ogden Lindsley invented, going back to Ogden Lindsley. So this research article, which you can look up, it's now behind a much bigger paywall than it used to be, unfortunately, when I made this originally. But it shows that the percentage of agreement using operational definition was much lower than when a movement cycle was used, which is a part of a pinpoint. We'll talk about that. So the problem, sometimes they can contain adverbs that may contribute to, observer disagreement, things like forcefully, moderately, loudly, all of those things can be interpreted differently. It's hard to agree. Even on verbs, right? Like transitions, yells at, falls. What's the classic one? Throwing chairs. Like there's gonna be people that means different things to different people all the time, which is funny. And then there's observer drift. So observer drift means that the way someone is identifying and counting a behavior just changes over time. And this is more likely to occur with an operational definition versus a pinpoint, which includes a movement cycle. So what the heck is a movement cycle? So pinpointing is a process that makes sense. This is already taken from precision teaching. It breaks down behaviors into different components. So that it's, it's just trying to make things more concrete and more identifiable for the person that has to identify the behavior and track it. So a pinpoint refers to a definition using the movement cycle and the context, and then a pinpoint plus would refer to using all three of these aspects, which we'll talk about: the movement cycle, the context, and the learning channel. So the movement cycle is the first piece, right? What is the movement cycle? It's my favorite. It's my favorite part because it's so simple, but it actually, I think, will really help if we think, even if we use this. So I'm not arguing that we all just change and use pinpoints, but I think we could use like the underlying principles in pinpointing in our operational definitions, potentially. So a movement cycle describes a single instance or one cycle of an action consisting of a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is observable, repeatable, and contains movement. So what is the movement cycle? Is an action. I'm going to say more about that. Action plus object. Just very simple, right? Action and an object. Stomps. Or knocks on table, the doorknob example, turns doorknob. But we'll look at examples of this, but let me just linger on this verb tense thing, because this is so funny to me. So when you're like thinking of the definition of behavior, I think it really helps to actually like think about this. When you're defining a behavior, just use the present tense of the verb. Like in the present moment, when you're observing a behavior, what is happening? And this makes it simplifies it. It's as simple as it can get. What's the present tense of the verb? Talks, looks, set, whatever it is, knocks, claps. And then, so we'll, as we move through these examples and like parts of treatment, right, the verb tense changes, but it only changes to either the past or the future. It's not like a maybe. So this is where like the definitions start to get ambiguous and kind of convoluted, because we're writing things like the client was able to do the action. And other things. There's other ways that people are phrasing this. Throw those out, right? But I think the easiest way to throw those out is to just think, when I'm writing this, when I'm doing it as like data tracking, it's in the present tense. When I'm writing it in my treatment plan as a future target, I'm just writing it in the future tense. Client tax, client will tact. And then when I'm reporting the data in my progress note, it's in the past tense because it just happened. Client tacted. What? Not was able to, not any other, like, I can't think of any other like grammar term for other tenses, but just this. In your definition, just use the present tense, and then it only ever changes to either the past tense if you're reporting data or the future tense if you're writing an objective. Keep it simple. Actually, grammar school. So that's the movement cycle. Action, object. So examples. Says ball, touches, knows, claps, can, says cookie. Right? Verb, object, easy peasy. Okay, so this is like a diagram. Yes, Robert.
Can I ask a clarification?
Yes.
Can you go back to the again? So the object is the receiver of the action. It's not like, it wouldn't be stomped foot, it would be stomped floor.
Stomped, yeah. It would be like foot stomps floor thing.
Yeah.
I think so. That does get confusing sometimes, because there's like indirect objects also.
Yeah. Sorry, thank you.
But yeah, that is before, would be the object. So this is the diagram of the pinpoint plus. The whole thing is, so this is useful on its own, the pinpoint, its movement cycle in the context. And then if we want to add even more, which we'll look at briefly, the pinpoint plus then contains the learning channel. So the next thing is the context, which comprises the pinpoint. So the context adds to the definition, it adds to the ability to count the behavior. It provides context. It also points to the antecedents. It points to potentially what stimulus is controlling your target behavior. And there are times like, and this helps too, because sometimes definitions, like we're looking at a behavior and it appears to be the same behavior, but it's happening in different contexts, and it actually turns out that there's either multiple functions or there's different functions under, like in different environments. That's come up. So I think adding the context helps you identify when you might need to like add another objective or look at a behavior separately. If it has a different context, it might be a different behavior to target, even though it topographically looks really similar. So these questions are like, these are the prompts that will lead you to adding. Right, so you're answering where, when, with what, or with whom, not all of those questions, but whichever one is relevant. So in the context of same example, adding context. Says ball, we're answering when presented with ball, and staff says, what's this? That one's a little tricky because there's conditional stimulus. I'm talking about that today. Touches nose when staff touches nose, claps hand when staff says clap hands, says cookie when staff says cookie, says cookie, or says cookie when there's motivation to access the cookie. So these examples, I think it's helpful to include examples that are like outside of the scope of our, what we typically target, but I stuck to what you'll notice are all different operants, commonly targeted things, just to what are those close in exemplars, maybe, just to like start the generalization process with stuff that is already familiar to us. So these are pinpoints then. So this includes your movement cycle and your context. So the next thing to add then, if we wanted to complete this whole diagram, is the learning channel. So learning channels can be a little bit scary. I feel like that's where this kind of falls off sometimes. So I'm really not going to go into much depth with the learning channel because it's like, a whole, could be an entire semester of things, but I think it's really useful to just like think about why it exists. So what is a learning channel? It includes, we're going to tack the learning channel just like in the diagram onto the front of those definitions that we've already made. And all we're doing is hyphenating two words. We're hyphenating one from this column and one from this column. What is this? The x-axis are the ins. So we have ins and outs, and we're going to put an in with an out. Ins are sensory inputs. I love this, but you're going to move the box.
Keep going.
Okay.
What's wrong?
Okay. I thought, yeah, no, the first one's right after this. Or did I skip the first one?
Keywords.
Where are my keyword slides? What happened to them?
You sent me the wrong version.
I don't know how I could have. All right, the first keyword. Here's the first keyword. Ready, everybody, here it comes. I'm not going to say it again. It's apple. The first keyword is apple. And then what slide is this? Do you know? No, you don't have to pull that. Okay, anyway. So in the analysis, so in our sensory inputs, the context already, right, was giving us clues to like what the relevant antecedent stimulus is. And the learning channel is gonna point to, again, is how that stimulus is being perceived. So now you can see like our behavioral definition does not just include the behavior that's happening, it's building out from that to make it very, very specific. It's what behavior and under what circumstances, and this points that even more specifically. So sensory inputs, we have all of the senses, obviously. 3 is included, that refers to private events, right? Things that we can't observe. Great, thanks, Rob. And then physical outputs, these are really just like categorizing what type of movement the behavior is. Like what, you know, it just is like a label, a category for what the behavior is. These vary. You'll see different charts within precision teaching which have different outs. For our purposes, I don't think it's extremely important that we like define each and every one of those. Especially within our operands, like the ones we're dealing with the most are doing and saying. And then some of these are really more used with like academic skills, like marking, selecting, like tapping would be like a mouse click tapping, right? So it's just like referring to specific behaviors with a label, but I don't think we need to really go into the outs. And the ends are pretty easy because they're all the senses. That's the way we perceive every stimulus ever, right? So how do we apply learning channels? Okay, so let's try to pick our learning channels for these examples that we've already done. So again, here is our learning channel matrix from precision teaching. Okay, so says ball when presented with the ball. So let's make a learning channel for this. What would the learning channel be for this? Says ball when presented with ball. So the first thing we want to ask, we want to find out what the in is. We need to know what the stimulus is, and then how are we? Okay, good. Good. So says ball when presented with ball. Presented with ball is a stimulus. C is our in, and then what's our out? Say. Good. See, say, says. It sounds like a nursery rhyme. See, say, but that is how we build a pinpoint clause, right? See, say, says ball when presented with ball. Next one, touches nose when staff touches nose. What would that one be? See, so what are we seeing? Staff touching. Yeah, staff touching nose is our antecedent. We see that, and then we do nose touching. So see, do touches nose when staff touches nose. Good. Next one. Claps hands when staff says clap hands. Hear. Do. We hear the antecedent stimulus, which is clap hands, and we do hand clapping. Here, do clap hands. Look at all the present tense verbs. Woo! Says cookie when staff says cookie. Give you cookie, got you cookie. Give me cookie, got you cookie. You guys have that one? New girl? No? Give me cookie, got you cookie. I'll play that after. Okay, says cookie when staff says cookie. Here, say. Yeah. Here's the staff say cookie, says cookie. Says cookie when there's motivation to access cookie. You see the cookie? There's motivation to access cookie. We don't know if they can see a cookie. Yes. So trick question. When you can't. Free. Yeah, free. So that's when we would use free. Is when the antecedent stimulus is private. Okay. Okay. So free. What do we have? Free, say, says cookie, when there's motivation to access cookie.
Go back to the slide with.
Yes. Think we have one more. What's so funny, Rob, Marty?
Great sound effects.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Deleting. Good that?
Oh,
So,
question in the chat,
what is that?
when would you use free as now?
I think in reference to private events. Right? Neither are observable. But
You probably wouldn't write it as an objective, but
No.
that example might be when I see Gina, I'm happy,
yeah,
right? That would be free.
free feels happiness when Gina walks in. That's a definition.
See free.
See free.
Love it.
See free. Yeah, good question. So pop quiz. What operant is this?
Learning cycle, learning cycle?
What, yes, it is, it has a learning cycle, but what so if I'm using this definition, what is it? It's a task. If this definition shows up and you're reading it, you're like, oh, we're doing this, we're teaching this operant. What's this one? What operant? Yes, imitation. Clap hands and staff says clap hands.
Listeners.
Yes. Listener responding or receptive. That's cookie with staff says cookie. Gotcha cookie, gotcha cookie. Cookie, gotcha.
It's okay, Rosemary, it's stuff we'll teach you. Don't worry.
Yes, you don't have to know this yet, Rosemary, sorry. And color. Yes, identical verbal responses. Here say cookie, yes, we got it. Okay, says cookie when in motivation access the cookie. Man. Yes, okay, great. I couldn't. Okay, here's code word number 2. Ready? Code word number 2. Only gonna say it once, never gonna say it again. It's blueberry. Blueberry. Said it twice, said I wasn't going to.
What do we use these for?
To get credit for the C's.
Do we type them in somewhere?
Yes, you'll need to know them for your quiz.
Got it.
Okay. I didn't send that to you. You didn't. No, I didn't send those words. You didn't. I did? You didn't. I did not. Sorry. I'm doing it now. I don't know. Okay, so how are we applying all of this stuff? This is the wrap up of the definition part of this. And we're almost only a little over halfway, so we're actually on a good track right now. 19 out of 30, perfect, I love it. Okay, application and treatment. So to tie all these things, we're talking about the definitions together. We need the definitions because the whole thing that we're doing here is successful behavior change relies, this is like the first building block, the first thing you need to achieve changes in behavior is a sound definition of behavior. And then we're going to talk about measurement because in order to detect whether behavior change is happening, whether your interventions are effective or not, you need the correct measurement system. You need to be accurately representing the behavior to see if the behavior is changing in the way that you intended. So for each of our, so the whole context of this, for each of our behaviors in our treatment plans, we need to be able to answer the following questions. What single behavior are we targeting? Or if we have a bundle, are they all defined in that way, like tantrum behaviors? And then how are we measuring it? When we're writing objectives, we need to be able to very easily answer these questions. And if you're a person reading an objective, and you can't answer these questions, it's time for you to schedule a meeting with your VC or your PA so you can talk about it. So all target behavior definitions should be objective, clear, and complete. And that sounds like duh, boring, obvious, but these are hard things to do, actually. Observable characteristics, clear, observable. Clear is unambiguous, not using any of those like that language that could be misinterpreted. And it's rephrasable, it's not convoluted or complicated, and complete. So includes examples and non-examples, especially like if you have something where you're bundling behaviors together, like tantrums, what does it include? What behaviors does it include? What does it not include? That really helps round out a definition. So we're gonna play a game I like to call awesome or not awesome. And and you can tell me whether you would use this definition or would you question it or add to it? Okay, first one, client falls to the ground. Rob, questioning, yes, we're questioning it, why?
Oh, I'm just giving what the people.
Great, Rob.
Well, falls is a little too ambiguous. Did they accidentally fall or did they intentionally drop to the ground?
Yes, great, were they on a chair, were they standing? Where were they? Like, we don't have context here, right? We have a nice present tense verb, and we have an object, but we don't have context, we need more information. When bell rings, client grabs folder and puts it in his backpack. Lauren likes it. Cat likes it, cat likes it, chat and cat, great, I like it too. Client participates in discussions. Chelsea hates it, Lauren hates it, I don't like it either, why? Rosemary, why don't you like it?
It doesn't have any like context behind it, like how are they participating in the discussion?
It doesn't have context and participates is not,
A lot of different things. for different
participates
people.
is ambiguous.
Yeah.
Yes, good. Client engages in interactive play with, while sharing with peers. Chat likes it. Chelsea doesn't know. Lauren seems a little confused, is making faces, but also giving me a thumbs up. I don't love it. Why don't I love it? Chelsea, why don't you love it?
Because how are they interacting? Is it?
Interactive is a little ambiguous. And there
But you
might,
can say because they're interacting by sharing.
right, it's ambiguous and might include multiple behaviors. It might be interacting, it might be different than sharing. Those might be, we need
I
to.
think sharing is a little iffy too, because sometimes people define sharing as parallel play with the same objects.
Exactly, yeah, sharing, I like, but it needs context, yeah. Good. Client releases item in their hand after being asked to share by an adult or peer.
Okay.
Lauren likes it, chat likes it, Rosemary likes it, I like it too. That, what we were just talking about, might be a good way to better define sharing. Releases item in the hand when asked to release the item. Okay, Lauren.
I think, like, if that was, like a goal or an objective, like, it would have to say like within 1 prompt or within 2 prompts.
Yes, there's certainly other dimensions here, that's a great point, yeah. You can provide additional context here depending on the behavior and the, where in the treatment they are of this. Absolutely, sometimes additional context needs to be added, which is like within how many prompts. Sometimes, when we talk about measurement, we'll talk about that, like latency is context, or we can add that, so good point. I hope we'll talk about that more in measurement. We need to move on. Okay. When loud noises occur, client demands to access headphones for the removal of the noise. Lauren doesn't like it. Lauren, why don't you like it?
Because what's loud to me might not be loud to you.
Okay, that's a good point. Great. I like this one, but that's a great point. We might need to define that, and we'll talk about that in the measurement section. I do like it because it gives me context. And it gives me context, it has a movement cycle and a context, but there is some ambiguity there for sure, good point. Client raises hand and teacher asks question. Cat likes it, I like it, good. When denied access to iPad, client tantrums. We don't like it, obviously tantrums is one of those things that need to be better defined. And the last one is mom uses short chart and delivers reinforcement during session. Lauren likes it. Cat's not sure. I question it because it has 2 different meters.
Yeah.
Yes, question.
Yes, I think Sky's just kind of giving input, is the tantrum behavior defined in the client treatment plan?
Yeah,
What kind of reinforcement are we talking about? So she's just asking the right question.
those are questions, guys. Exactly. I want Yeah, that's the whole point, dude. When you read those and you have those questions, ask those questions to Jess in your case. Tips. Okay, so if you encounter any of those questionable ones, what can you think about? What can you do? You can, so just general guidelines here, come up with your definition, take data based on that definition, see how data tracking goes. If data tracking is a disaster or impossible, go back to your definition and change it. If you have trouble identifying single behaviors, think about, is this a chain of behaviors? And you can write out a chain of behaviors and then decide, do I want to include these all together, bundle them up, define them as you would with tantrum behaviors? Or do we need to separate these and target these individually? Scour your definitions for those, for ambiguity, ambiguous words. Or just extra superfluous words you don't need. Get rid of those, make them as clear and concise and readable as possible. Get rid of, I never ever in my life want to see what's able to in anybody's notes or treatment plans ever again. Just be clear about that. If you need to target a behavior that does not pass the dead man's test, think about what the opposite of that behavior is. And maybe instead of, if you were thinking about increasing, staying in your seat, maybe we think about decreasing, getting out of your seat, because that's easier to count. It's more observable, it's more measurable. On task, refusal, a lot of times, but we need to get rid of refusal. And I see refusal in there, like, what is refusal? What is happening? If we can't measure that, maybe we measure the opposite, completing directives, and we increase completing directives rather than trying to decrease refusal, okay? Measurement, so let's go on to measurement. Didn't leave my, that's fine. So very basic with measurement, we're gonna talk very basically, going back to like everybody's 40-hour RBT training. The dimensions of behavior. So measurement, the concept of measurement is the characteristics of what is being measured. So the characteristics of the behavior is the dimensions of the behavior. The quality and appropriateness of the measurement tool, the technical skill of the measurer, and how measures are used, how everything is then used. So this is very complicated again, right? Like this includes a whole bunch of different dimensions, but when we're looking at thinking about how we're going to measure a behavior, we want to look at the dimensions of behavior, and they point us typically to, you know, what is the relevant dimension of this behavior that I want to change, and that's going to point us in the right direction of what we should choose. The dimensions of behavior that are relevant here: repeatability, temporal extent, which is like how long is it happening, duration, or temporal locus. Every behavior has these. Temporal locus is just when in time does it happen, and then we'll also return to topography and magnitude and talk about those. So under those three categories are the corresponding ways to measure behavior. So under repeatability, that's where we're talking about frequency or rate, which is just, it's something that is the beginning is clear, and beginning and end are clear, and we can just take a count of it, which is we call frequency. In my mind, like, frequency doesn't really exist, because anytime you count something, it happens over some amount of time, and then you have a rate. So that's what a rate is. It's just a count over some amount of time. And that's how you produce a rate, is you just get a count and you divide by the amount of time you observe for. Whatever, in any case, if you're like taking some amount of behavior over a session and that's how it's defined, then you're doing frequency or count. But if you're doing something like per hour rather than per session, that's a rate then. Percent of response opportunities. Again, this is basically just a count, but you're not just counting the behavior. This is a behavior where the opportunity to do the behavior doesn't just always, it's not like random, or it's not based on the kid. Typically, we're presenting the opportunity to do the behavior. So we have to not just count how many times the behavior happens, we have to count how many times we had the opportunity to do the behavior. And that's going to be more relevant than just a rate. And then acceleration, which we're not going to talk about today, but I wish that we could. I need to do more things on acceleration, is rate over rate. So it's the rate of something over like a larger unit of time. So it's like responses per minute per week, something like that. We don't really need to worry about that today. Temporal extent is duration. How long is something happening? Temporal locus, refers to latency. What is latency? Latency is the time between the antecedent stimulus and when the behavior starts. So transitions, we might need to look at latency, like Lauren was saying, we might need to add that into our definition. And likewise, inter-response time. Inter-response time is the time between two behaviors, two of the same behaviors. Okay. Sometimes it's necessary, so we really want to choose something from this based on the core dimensions of behavior. But sometimes our definitions are also, and our mastery criteria are also going to have to include an aspect of topography or magnitude, all depending on what the behavior is. For example, letter strokes or motor skill, letter strokes we don't usually have to deal with as much, but motor skills are receptive skills or listener responding skills. How they're doing it, if you're doing touch nose and they're touching their nose with their forefinger, or if they're doing this, you know, those are two different behaviors that you're going to have to represent topographically in some way, in addition to how many times they're doing it or percent of opportunities they're doing it. We also want to know the topography in that case is relevant. And magnitude, same thing. Writing pressure, volume, this comes up a lot. This is a tough one. We might need a kid to respond in class or respond to peers, but they might be responding in a whisper, and that's not relevant. Because it's not just a matter of how often, it's a matter of magnitude of you know, how loud they're talking. So the method you choose should match the dimension of behavior that you're targeting for change, right? So think like behaviors have multiple dimensions, just like that, of if someone is, and we might have to do these separately in separate objectives over time. No, I guess it's in there. Do it after this. So think about, what do you need to increase? If you need a kid to come to circle time, do you need to increase the number of times he comes to circle time, or do you need to increase the duration he stays at circle time? So those are different dimensions of the same behavior. What's the direction of behavior change? Again, thinking like, do we want to increase or decrease? And then depending on that will help you choose. Like sometimes you're gonna look at the corresponding other behavior, and that's gonna give you a better, it's gonna more clearly show you how to measure and how to go with target. And then, is it possible to observe or record the behavior? If it's not, then you need to balance those things. Like I need to be making sure that I'm accurately representing this, but I also need to make sure that data collecting is possible. This comes up all the time with like higher level social skills. We talk about this all the time. You need a kid to effectively be interacting and having a conversation with other people, and there might be multiple relevant dimensions there. You know, it might be a magnitude thing, it might be a frequency thing, it might be a percent of opportunities. All of those things are relevant, but you can't have staff collect each and every one of those dimensions. So you need to think, okay, which one of these best represents progress in this area? Which is going to best represent, you know, that when this thing is mastered, we could move on to something else, or we could look at a different dimension. But we're doing that. We're always balancing those things. And then again, just when you're writing these, be careful that you're choosing one, or you can choose one of these and include topography or magnitude, but we don't want to be having more than one of these that are corresponding to these behavioral dimensions in your definitions in your treatment plan for your mastery criteria. And what we could touch on continuous or discontinuous data track, like data tracking is a whole nother training, but like if you come up with something that's really hard to track, but you really think it represents behavior, you might look at recording that just for intervals and do a discontinuous method of data tracking, balance it that way. But it's always a balance, right? We can't have like perfect representation of the behavior all the time, especially in complicated settings like group or like after school. And so this is a really great flow chart that you all this is in the white book, actually, if anyone has the Cooper book, this is in there. It's really great. It's just a flow chart of what, method of data you should, of measurement you should use, but it's great because it includes like more of the, it doesn't just include like what is the nature of the behavior is discrete and countable, but it's also including those aspects of how possible is observation, and it kind of balances those. So we're not gonna go through all of those, but everyone should look at it. There it is. Okay, the third code word is kiwi. Code word number 3, the last of the code words is kiwi. And then we're just gonna practice. We have 2 practice pages. This one is, yeah, I want you guys to come up with what, or tell me which of those core measurement systems based on the behavioral dimensions you would pick for this behavior. Client demands for desired items and actions. If you were writing this into an objective in a treatment plan, what, you just choose any number as your mastery criteria, but what measurement would you use?
Chance quiet, nobody wants to answer.
With the first one?
The first one, mandate. Frequency. Frequency or rate. Frequency, rate, same thing, in my opinion. Client will demand for desired transactions at a rate of 10 per hour. Great, I love it. That's a good one. Client will correctly tag pictures presented by staff. Percent of opportunities? We all agree on that? Great. So this is a whole another training, which we will have on how to choose mastery criteria. But so you could absolutely do percent of opportunities, but really and so I think there's an ideal progression of which measurement system you choose based on like where in their learning of these tasks they are. So when they're just initially acquiring the tasks, percent of opportunities could be used, and also an inventory can be used. And this is what I call an inventory. Is it called an inventory? I just call it that. I call it an inventory. Where you're just building up mastery of a certain amount of stimuli that they can correctly tap, and then you're also using a percent of opportunities. Then in precision teaching, another measure of mastery. So once you have those mastered, you can look at fluency. And when we look at how fluent they are, that points to the rate, how quickly and how in generalization, right? Fluency, generalization, how quickly can they tackle all of these things? And then we would look at rate. So I just want to put that in there just so you all know, like there are situations where you would use a rate for tacts or coacs or receptives, like to measure fluency rather than mastery, but typically yes, percent of opportunities is fine. Client will demand for removal in the presence of aversive stimuli. Opportunities. Lauren, learning that, Chelsea, yeah. Yeah, that's what I put too. That's what I would use because the behavior is relevant to how many times the opportunities occurred, right? If I just know how many times the behavior happened, it could be that they did it 5 times and they had 10 opportunities to demand, or it could be that they did it 5 times and they had 25 opportunities, and those are very different representations of how close we are to mastery. Client will play interactively with peers. Duration. Good. Client will initiate conversation with peers. Frequency. Who said duration? Why?
I've seen it before. They did frequency and duration.
Duration of initiations?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, I see initiation as just like the initial, initiation, good definition, Gina. Initiation seems more discrete to me, like there's, it would be a pretty consistent duration of that initiation, but initiation should be better defined, and then we can talk about it then. You know, that's a good point too, but yes, I have, I will initiate conversation with peer 2 times in session, so which is a frequency. That's, yeah, so it's actually not a rate, it's a frequency or account. Client will transition to next activity. Opportunities. Client will exhibit eye contact during each conversational exchange. Duration. Why?
That would be more.
I would say percent of opportunities. They're given 5 opportunities to have a conversation.
Yeah. So. Oh, rate, why rate?
Well, if the conversation is like 3 minutes long, if they look at you 1 time, or if they look like you have eye contact 4 times.
I think all of those could apply. If you did a rate, it would have to be within each conversation. Which might be tricky because conversations will range in duration. So that might be tricky. What did you say? What did you say?
Percent of opportunities.
Percent of opportunities. This would be clear if I said client will exhibit eye contact at least 1 time during each exchange. Then it would more clearly be, but you could also look at duration of eye contact. Now, if I had my choice between percent of opportunities and duration of eye contact, and I think those are both really good measures of this representations of this behavior, what would I think about in terms of choosing one to put in my treatment?
Which one was?
What was Chelsea gonna say?
I was gonna say which one's more observable.
Yeah, those are both excellent questions. But so that's exactly what I mean by like, we have to balance these things. Which one is more socially significant, duration of eye contact? But also which one is actually able to be recorded? Which one are we gonna accurately take data on? So I think in this case, it would be harder to record the duration of eye contact, but I think it would be a really relevant piece of data to have.
I think it would also be on goal for a longer duration of eye contact, because even like typically. You
Oh, you're
wouldn't, like,
opening a whole can of
maintain-
worms here, Kat.
That wouldn't be appropriate, you want constant.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly, it'd be
duration
really
of
hard to choose mastery criteria, if you were looking at the duration of eye contact. What are we aiming for? I don't know. Well, those are all really good questions. Great, all right, let's do one more, no, we're out of time. Are we out of time?
Yeah.
Okay, there was one more game of awesome or not awesome, but that's fine.
Well, give us one, let's look to it, show it to us so we can gaze upon it.
What? Let's give
Let's just see it. Oh, yeah.
Oh, you just sent it out? You are gonna send it out? Oh, you're gonna say, okay. I mean, so, okay, do you wanna just go through these, if anyone has to leave, they can leave? Or do you wanna just go through and give the answers, so they have it?
Just give me the answers.
There you go.
Right, Ashley, tell them what they need to do to win their
Alright,
prize.
so for those of you that are.
No prize.
Today, you will be getting a link to the post quiz. Please complete that. And once it's completed, I will send you a certificate, CEU, so that you can keep that for your training for KidsPeace. If you're an outside person taking this training, you can use the CEU for your BACB requirements. If you are not currently live and taking this at a later date, when you finish this training, you can send me an email and I will send you the post quiz link. And once you've completed, please just let me know that it's completed so that I can make sure that you are getting your credit and your certificate for that. If you have questions, you can email anyone but us. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for attending.